AI is incredible. It can teach you how to fry an egg and even write a poem, pirate style. Yarr! But it knows nothing about your work. Slackbot is different. It doesn't just know the facts. It knows your schedule. It can turn a brainstorm into a brief. And it doesn't need to be taught. Because Slackbot isn't just another AI. It's AI that knows your work as well as you do. Visit slack.com/meet Slackbot to learn more.
Welcome back to another edition of the Disney Dish Podcast with Jim Hill. It's me, Len Testa, and this is our show for the week of Schmurz Day, January 19th, 2026. Happy Martin Luther King Jr. Day. On the show today, news, where we answer the question, when did summer vacation stop being a thing? Plus listener questions. Then in our main segment, Jim takes a look at the 4 different versions of the Sword in the Stone ceremony that got built at Disney theme parks around the globe. Let's get started by bringing in the man who reminds meteorologists that it's rude to give a snowstorm warning and then not deliver on that promise. It's Mr. Jim Hill. Jim, how's it going?
Len, I would just be happy if the meteorologists, who especially work up here in New Hampshire, would agree that if they get a forecast wrong, they would at least reimburse me for the money I then spend on milk and bread, out ahead of each snowstorm. I don't know what it is about being raised up here in New England, but it's literally hardwired into all us poor slobs in this part of the country that as soon as they announce a snowstorm of size, you must drop everything that you were doing and run to the store where you then buy a loaf of bread and a bottle of milk.
Yeah.
And Len, for the past 60 years, I've been programmed to do this. But it's incomplete
Does
programming.
everyone just make French toast? Like what during? Is that the milk and the bread?
That's what I'm thinking. And the problem is like, am I supposed to make this to appease the snow gods? And if so,
exactly.
What's the ritual?
Exactly the purpose of these specific items? Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. Am I supposed to toss a plate out, on the lawn in the middle of the storm, or am I supposed to put it out on the porch out ahead of the storm? I just want answers, Len. That's all I'm asking.
If we could just get the National Weather Service to weigh in on this, I think it would be helpful to many Americans who live up north.
And at the very least, let us know. Do we also need more maple syrup? I'm just saying. Just a little info.
You know that it's bad when your grocery store has a run not only on the bread and the milk, but also vanilla and eggs and a dab of cinnamon.
Just a dash of nutmeg. There we go.
Exactly. All right, Jim, let's do a quick shout out to our subscribers. Thanks to everyone who subscribes over at patreon.com/JimHillMedia, including Dee Dee, Glenn Parker, James O'Connor, Jennifer Jusome, Lynn Wolfe, and Matt Allager. Jim, this is the Universal creative team working on a 1920s speakeasy concept for Frankenstein Manor in Epic Universe. You'll enter through the back of a mausoleum. The bar serves period-appropriate drinks like the Corpse Reviver and the Graveyard Shift, while the house band does jazz covers of pop hits such as My Immortal and Bring Me to Life. Look for this secret bar, the Stitch and Switch, in Darkmoor soon. True story.
Oh, if that's not true, it should be. Somebody, Universal Creative, listen to this idea. Do this.
The Stitch and Switch. I love it. All right, on to the news. Folks, the Disney Dish News is sponsored by UnlockedMagic.com from our friends at DVCRentalStore.com. Jim, are you tired of shopping for food and then having to decide what's for dinner every night? Walt Disney World has hundreds of restaurants that will cook for you every single day. Plus, our friends at UnlockedMagic.com have discounted theme park tickets, including savings of $50 or more per person on 4-day tickets. So put down that can of green beans that expired in 2004 and start next week's meal prep by visiting unlockedmagic.com. Bon appetit. I don't know if they appreciate the ad reads that I'm doing as much as I do, but I hope they do.
and trust me, I've got green beans that old in my cabinet. But anyway, all right.
It's true. All right, Jim, on to the news. So for Walt Disney World, there are tons of refurbishments going on across property this month. And we got some updates from Imagineering on Big Thunder Mountain. Disney says that, quote, among the new additions is a striking underground scene that will send trains into a mysterious cavern, glowing with phosphorescent pools and shimmering with iridescent stalactites and stalagmites. The new scene, inspired by the rainbow caverns of Disneyland's early Mine Train Through Nature's Wonderland, blends nostalgic visual effects with new storytelling. While it may look peaceful, the caverns are anything but safe. And Jim, I threw some concept art in there. So we have caverns.
We do.
In Big Thunder. What do you make of this promotion of whatever's changing?
Well, it's interesting. Good Morning America this past Saturday. In fact, you might have found this interesting, Len. It was the second Saturday in a row, whereas the 9 o'clock hour started on, this news magazine on ABC. They did a promotional piece about Walt Disney World and eventually ended with, there's wonderful bargains going on right now. But they had Wyatt Winter, veteran producer at Imagineering, come on and talk about this aspect, but he sort of leaned into that it's a new lighting package for this area of the attraction that previously you've traveled through, and yes, it's the same Rockworth, that sort of thing, but this is the first time with a dedicated lighting package. The other thing that Wyatt mentioned is as you go through Big Thunder Mountain Railway this time around, for the first time ever, you are going to see gold.
Saw that. Yeah, interesting. Yeah.
So, it's taking what's there and enhancing, in the great Disney tradition of plussing. So, and more to the point, it's just nice to see, Rainbow Caverns, in some form finally make it out to the East Coast.
Yeah, I love the throwback. They, I think they also mentioned that they're going to revive a bunch of effects that haven't worked in a number of years. So I'm excited to see that as well, because some of those gags are really, really good, and they really enhance the ride experience, like the steam vents that go out, the explosions and stuff like that. Remember when the last time they did scene ones for this? Mm-hmm. It's got to be 10, 15 years ago right now.
Easy.
Where they had like the literal canaries in the coal mine that you could view.
Yep. Yeah, but again, Len, what does it say about the modern Disney company that, this is literally a line about the promotion of the new version of Big Thunder, that will be opening later this spring. Hey, all that stuff that was broken and turned off, hey, we fixed it. It's like, your landlord wants credit for the fact that
we fixed it. Yeah,
we fixed it. It's like, okay, well, lovely. Okay, where were you 10 years ago when this effect originally broke?
You've got running water now that it's
Yes.
Exactly. You've got hot running water in your apartment now. I didn't even get a thank you. Like, oh, come on.
Jeez. Okay.
Also, Jim, a casting call went out last week for the new Bluey experience at Disney's Animal Kingdom. Disney's looking for, quote, high-energy performers to host and lead games inspired by the series. Actors should be comfortable hosting large groups, working with children, and improvising during the interactive experience. And, Jim, they say that rehearsals are going to start in early May. So I'm guessing that means that we should see previews, maybe soft openings sometime late May, depending on how those rehearsals go, or early June. So definitely in time for summer crowds. What do you think?
Well, I guess the question I now have, do we have a close date for Rafiki's Planet Watch? Because I have to assume that, out ahead of this, that's got to be shut down to be retooled. Because didn't they mention initially that new Australian animals will be brought in to be displayed and new signage and all that? So have you heard anything to that effect?
I think we'll see the work around Conservation Station itself, not just not the entirety of Rafiki's Planet Watch. I think they can keep a lot of that open, like the walking trails and whatnot, the petting zoo, while they're doing some of these conversions. And I don't expect this to be a super, super long thing. So if we get an outage, if we get a closure, it's probably going to be, I'm guessing, a couple of weeks tops.
Okay. Duly noted.
Yeah, and we're at the point where, I think Everest is down right now. We'll eventually get Dinosaur closing. They've got to sort of like stagger these closures so it doesn't impact wait times too much. It does help that we're on the other side of the Wildlife Express train over there, so not that many people, relatively speaking, are going over there to begin with. But again, in a park where you're taking an entire land offline for a year, every little bit helps.
No, absolutely. But again, watch this space once Bluey comes online.
Yep.
That's, going, again, it's another one of those moments where the center of gravity of a theme park is going to shift, at least for parents with preschoolers. Just, it'll be the running of the bulls only, in this case, the running for Bluey.
What I'm anticipating here is that Disney will hire for the Wildlife Express train is the thing that takes you from Africa to Rafiki's Planet Watch and back, right? I'm anticipating that when Bluey opens, Disney's going to hire a couple of those Japanese subway pushers the people that like push passengers into the subway trains to cram them in. We'll be seeing those. So if there are any Tokyo Disneyland cast members,
there we go,
looking for a new job opening, a temporary role. I'm just saying.
And just remember, as you step into this position, those toddlers, they can fit in the overhead compartment. I mean,
yeah, you can actually put them on top of other people. We can hold them like surfboards.
There we go.
Like, look, do you want to maximize capacity or don't you? That's what I'm saying here.
Okay.
All right. Over in Disneyland, Jim, the big news there is that Disney's officially changing the timeline in Galaxy's Edge to include all of the Star Wars films. So character greetings will now include Darth Vader, Luke Skywalker, Leia Organa, Han Solo, and others. We'll also have the Mandalorian and Grogu plus R2-D2 and Ahsoka Tano.
Mm-hmm.
More importantly for me, I think, Jim, the background music is going to be John Williams soundtracks for the first 6 films, and the stores are going to be updated to include different names and different backstories.
Mm-hmm.
But the rides themselves are at this point unaffected. Jim, is any of this really a surprise?
Well, think about it. Just last year, Disney made a very big deal about how Luke Skywalker, mind you, he was in his Return of the Jedi garb from Episode 6, but that he came into the land. And this was kind of the canary in the coal mine to the effect of how would people react? How excited would they be to see characters from the original trilogy in this space? And obviously, lots of people were excited. Let's just be honest here, Len. This was the original conceit for Star Wars Land when it first went into development back in 2014, 15. Remember, Disney's Hollywood Studios, the idea was that, you were supposed to turn the corner off of Hollywood Boulevard and find yourself, at Mos Eisley. In fact, you were going to be able to go to the original cantina rather than Oga's. So this, in a weird sort of way, is circling back to what the Imagineers originally wanted to do with Star Wars in the parks, is give the people what they want. That said, though, it is worth noting that it's kind of zoned, so to speak. I mean, Rey is supposed to move down the street and now do a meet and greet over by Rise of the Resistance. On the other hand, Mandalorian and Grogu, they will be setting up shop around the Millennium Falcon. That's where the new version of Smuggler's Run starts this summer.
Oh, got it. Okay.
And then, kind of interesting, at least according to the original publicity material here, Oga's is where you're going to find Princess Leia and Han Solo. And supposedly Leia is going to be trying to recruit people to, the rebellion. And Han, on the other hand, just wants to go in and get a drink. So...
True to form.
Going to be interesting to see, the guest interaction, especially over in that corner of Black Spire Outpost.
I'm not that up on Star Wars canon timeline canon, so I don't know if there are any two character pairings that obviously can't appear together, because they're like if one character died before another character was born, they could never appear together. I'm not sure if there are any of those. I wonder how Disney's going to handle that if there are.
Well, it's interesting you bring that up, because there are obvious questions about Kylo Ren, who, remember, Kylo Ren is actually Leia and Han Solo's son, Ben. And so, and more to the point, Darth Vader, took a dirt nap, several, installments earlier. So,
so Kylo Ren and Darth Vader can't appear together.
Yeah, and that gets kind of problematic, because if you remember, Len, down by where the blue milk is served, we have Kylo Ren's rather elaborate spacecraft set up, and he, regularly comes stepping out of that with, his stormtroopers, which, by the way, are different than Darth Vader's stormtroopers. So, going to be a very big costume rack backstage, I guess, is what we're saying.
The other thing I was talking to Laurel about the timeline last night, and the other question that I had was, and you just mentioned this, was do the characters and the spaceships also line up in terms of timeline? Like, can you show Han Solo with Kylo Ren's spaceship? Like, I don't know if this is a question of like the Model T, which was in production for 40 years and it's fine. Or is this like, like a very specific, like an Edsel where it was only produced for 2 years and they don't run anymore, right? Like, I don't know.
Well, interestingly enough, Kylo Ren, Han Solo was featured in the first of the Disney-produced Star Wars trilogies, The Force Awakens. Didn't necessarily come to a happy end, but, on the other hand, families are forgiving. Kylo Ren runs into his dad, could be a happy moment. We'll see.
Could you imagine that on, like that interaction on Father's Day? They have to do something special for that. Between Vader and Luke and Han and Kylo Ren. Oh my God. Just the jokes write themselves.
I'm just saying, Len, I don't know as Hallmark makes that card yet.
That card. It's a very, very niche market, but still.
There we go. So sorry I ran you through.
Two other bits of news. Universal has announced its 2026 schedule. So Mardi Gras runs February 7th through April 4th. That's always a good time. Halloween Horror Nights, Universal's big events for the year, run August 28th to November 1st. And then the winter holidays are November 14th through January 3rd, 2027. So if you guys are planning trips, those are the dates to look forward to.
Okay.
And speaking of schedules, Jim, I did an interview with a TV station from Youngstown, Ohio, earlier this week. And one of the questions that they asked me was, when did summer vacation stop being a thing in Walt Disney World? And so to answer that, I had to go back and look at some data. And here's how I figured this out. I'm using Disney's Value Resort standard room prices day by day as a proxy, right? So we all know that like a room at All-Star Music, and I used All-Star Music. A room at All-Star Music is super expensive during Christmas. It's super expensive during spring break, right? And then it's less expensive during different parts of the year. So if we could say reasonably that Disney is pricing its hotel rooms based on demand, right? I know that's not always the case, but let's just say it's true, right?
Okay.
But then based on the prices that we've seen over the last 10 or 15 years, when did Disney think the demand was highest and when it was lowest? Right? Fair. So I plotted the price for a standard room at All-Star Music every day of every year, going back to 2013, because we collect that data. And then to smooth out what I like to call in the math community, the jitters in the graph, I used a 7-day rolling average for that prices. And that tends to even out things because we know that Disney, prices stuff a little bit more expensively on weekends, right? But a 7-day moving average takes weekends into account. So in the show notes, I have a graph and it shows that pricing by day as a 7-day rolling average for 3 different years. The first year is a blue line and it says 2013, right? The x-axis goes left to right and it is days of the year from January 1st to December 31st. And Jim, you'll notice in the middle of that graph, roughly from the second week of June to the second week of August, there is a hump in that blue line that I like to call summer vacation.
Yeah. Right? And that's
okay. You see it there. It's clear, right? The blue.
I do.
Clearly there. All right, Jim, and I've annotated that graph with a label that says summer vacation just to make it more obvious. And there are similar spikes in pricing around President's Day and spring break and, Thanksgiving and Christmas. So I've labeled those. You can see what they are. So the interesting thing is that if you look in 2026, Jim, that summer hump, if you will, is gone.
Yeah. I mean,
pricing for summer is now flat. Yeah. It's really dropped.
Wow. It's worth noting 2013. And again, I understand that you talked about the graph being smoothed out over 7 days, that sort of thing. But again, these hotel rooms, just 13 years ago, averaged what? You want to say 82, 83% occupancy? Whereas we look at them
83% of the maximum price.
There we go.
Maximum price.
Okay.
So Disney was pricing those hotel rooms above 80% of the maximum price, basically the Christmas price. So the summer vacation price was 82% of the Christmas price. But in 2026, it's 72% of the max price. And Jim, you can also see in that, notice where that demand went, right? So now the blue line, which was 2013, used to drop significantly starting around the second week of August and stay low until Thanksgiving, right? You'd have a super minor peak around the third week of October. But now, Jim, look at the red line. Look how much higher the red line, which represents 2026 prices. Look how much higher that line is for fall now.
Yeah.
We've basically shifted summer demand to fall. Every other peak, every other valley kind of matches, right? President's Day still popular, spring break still popular, Thanksgiving, Christmas still popular. But what we're seeing in this graph is a tangible shift in demand from summer to fall.
Absolutely. And also worth noting, there is a particularly noticeable spike in mid to late October. And are you making the same connection I am? That's Mickey's Not So Scary?
It is actually. It's peaked. It's a confluence of fall breaks and Mickey's Not So Scary Halloween Party. Yeah, peaking right around then. Yeah.
Oh, that's fascinating.
The other question is then, when did this happen? And so I've got a second graph in the show notes that shows us 2018. Now, Jim, 2013 is still the blue line. The red line is now 2018. And notice in that second graph that you still see a summer peak in 2018 for pricing that is almost exactly the same as 2013, right? It's around 82% of the maximum price. But Jim, that only happens for the first 2 weeks of June. And look how quickly it drops off. By July 1st, the summer vacation pricing is gone in 2018.
Wow.
That tells me that by 2018, summer vacation, as far as Disney pricing was concerned, lasted basically the last 2 weeks of June.
Boy.
So we can say safely this trend has been in place since around 2018. Yeah.
Easily. But it just, for me, I would love to explore the contributing factors. I mean, how much of that came on the heels of a particularly brutal hurricane season, what was going on with gas prices, even what was going on in the overall economy. But wow, you're not wrong. Looking, from 2013 to 2018 to 2026, boy, that is a very noticeable shift in the overall pattern. And wow, I going to be interesting to see how Disney does, in fact, respond to this.
Yeah, so I looked at an explanation of why this was happening too, and I had two theories. The first one was there an increase in year-round school schedules so that people could have a break in the fall, take kids to Walt Disney World without having to worry about missing schools or exams? And it turns out that year-round schooling is actually less popular in the mid-2020s than it was 10 or 15 years ago. So that doesn't explain the jump in October visitations. What is more popular from an educational perspective is the rise in homeschooling. And those numbers are dramatically up from 10 or 20 years ago. And so I think that explains part of this bump, that if you're homeschooling, you can work around travel schedules much more easily than if you're in a public school.
That's an excellent observation.
Yeah, so that was super interesting. All right, on to listener questions. So, Jim, a number of listeners, including Nick and Jeremy, wrote in to say that last week's talk about the Sword in the Stone ceremony is still taking place in the parks. So, Jeremy writes in and says, my son Calvin was picked to be the hero of Fantasyland some years ago. He's nonverbal, so I had to help out a little bit. Here is a video on YouTube of Calvin becoming the hero of Fantasyland, and I included that in the show notes.
And very, very sweet. Yes, thanks for sharing that, Jeremy.
Also, Amy wrote in with her own story and says, one of my fondest Disney memories is of my then 4-year-old son pulling the sword out of the stone sometime around 2010. We have photos of his very solemn face as he was paraded in a circle in front of the carousel and announced as the new king of the Magic Kingdom. After the small crowd dissipated, he burst into tears, blubbering that he just wanted to go home. After some coaxing, we were finally able to get him to explain that he thought he was going to have to live in the castle alone from that moment on. I mean, heavy is the head that wears the crown, right, Amy?
There we go. There we go. All right. And by the way, we'll be revisiting this story in the feature today, the sword and the stone thing. Weird history at the Disney parks, but
I'm excited to hear about it. Yeah, I saw I listened to the show and I thought it was a great follow-up thing, and people really loved it. All right, one more listener question. This one's from Matthew, who writes in with a question about the recent Wall Street Journal article on Walt Disney Imagineering. And Matthew said, what's generating buzz online is Joe Rohde's response to the, quote, progressive seduction portion on project approval. Rohde essentially called BS on that reporting. This wouldn't be the first time the Wall Street Journal had some questionable reporting on Disney. I recall the odd I was asked to tip a character performer piece from last year, though that was a different writer. Joe Rohde's been outside the company for over 5 years now, though, so it's possible the internal culture has changed substantially, though I'd assume he still keeps tabs on everything. What did Jim and Jim think about this? So for our folks who haven't read the article, the term progressive seduction in the article describes where Imagineering intentionally gives a scope and budget estimate to management that's not truly reflective of what they think the final deliverable is going to be. And then after approving the budget, Imagineering then adds show elements that drive up the cost once the project's approved. So, Jim, what are your thoughts on this? Does this actually happen?
Okay. There is one very famous instance where this did in fact happen, and it was known as Pleasure Island. And Joe actually worked on that project. I mean, in fact, that's the interesting about what Joe references in his Instagram post. He
said it happened one time, but he's not going to name the project.
There we go. All right. So, all right. I've just outed what happened. And there were significant repercussions because of that. There were brand new safeguards and that sort of thing put in place on the heels of, Pleasure Island, when it finally opened, was 300% over budget, Len. And whole clubs and things for that nighttime entertainment complex fell off the table because, things had gotten so out of control. And so that's a thing. And more to the point, yes, Joe left the company 5 years ago, but he's since come back as a consultant. So, Joe is aware of what's going on day to day. And, in a weird sort of way, it's lovely that Joe stepped up to defend Imagineering, because that's the weird thing about that article. It initially starts off as a piece that's sort of about Bob Chapek was in charge of the Disney company. He did a lot of things that were bad, and then, things changed. But this article then goes on to really sort of lay things at the feet of Imagineering and the corporate culture over there. And Len, you and I both know it's always interesting when you get an article like this. It's like, okay, what agenda is being serviced here? Because
Disney has to cooperate with the article, right? So
they do. Yeah.
Who do they make available? What do they say? How is it vetted?
There we
Stuff
go.
Like that. Yeah.
And, it is worth noting that $60 billion of projects are now passing through Imagineering, Villains Land, the new Piston Peak, all of the work that's going out in California. By the way, you did see that the what was it? The Coco ride is now officially under construction out there, right?
I didn't see it actually, but that's great. Where did they end up putting it, by the way?
It's going to actually be out behind the Incredicoaster.
Okay, that's the spot that I thought was available. Yeah, so there's an access road.
There we go.
That they can sort of like cut off. Yeah, okay, that's exactly where I thought it was going to go. All right, cool, good.
Yeah, but it's one of these situations like why is an article out there that is supposedly trying to bring Imagineering to heel bubbling up now? It's just sort of like, what agenda is being serviced, and more to the point, who put this in motion?
Right.
So just going to be interesting to watch the next. I mean, remember, Iger's headed out the door this year.
Yeah.
And in fact, one of the reasons the Imagineers are moving at speed to get as many of these projects up out of the ground and moving forward is, starting in January of 2027, there'll be a new sheriff sheriff in town. And, we could end up with another Jay Rizzullo, Tom Staggs situation where, remember, Jay Rizzullo was the guy who wanted the super deluxe meet and greets for New Fantasyland in Florida. And Staggs was the one who said, nope, get rid of that. Give me the Seven Dwarfs Mine Train.
Yeah. So if you're an Imagineer and your project has approval but hasn't yet started, you're learning how to drive a backhoe. So you can.
Yes.
You are calling California Power and Light to ask where cables are buried underground because you're working second shift, moving dirt around to get your project to a point where it can't be stopped.
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely.
Fantastic. All right. So we're going to keep an eye on that. That'll be interesting. I'd love to hear the next time we do an Unpacked with Jim Scholl. I want to ask him about this specifically.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. No. Let's definitely do that.
All right, folks. We're going to take a quick commercial break. When we return, Jim gives us the story of Sword in the Stone and then relates it to other castle things going on. We'll be right back.
It's the final chapter of the college football playoff.
It comes down to this.
Miami's unmatched grit and tenacity through the postseason has led them home. The national title now within reach.
They are confident. They are battle-tested.
Undefeated Indiana, led by Chris Signetti and Heisman winner Fernando Mendoza, have the chance to take home their first title and claim college football immortality.
The most remarkable turnaround in the history of college football.
The College Football Playoff National Championship presented by AT&T. Monday at 7:30 p.m. Eastern on ESPN and the ESPN app.
Año nuevo, los mismos Extra Value Meals en McDonald's. Ahora te puedes llevar 2 snack wraps y papitas y una bebida mediana por solo $8. Solo por tiempo limitado. Precios y participación pueden variar. Los precios pueden ser más altos en Hawái, Alaska y California y con entrega.
And we're back. All right, Jim, Sword in the Stone.
Yeah, well, again, this all got started last week when Christopher S. reached out and, asked if you and I could talk about the history of Sword in the Stone, the ceremony on a future Disney dish. And I didn't want to really do too deep a dive while, Len was out of pocket. So Chris Cox and I did sort of a Reader's Digest version. And, I described how the original version of this guest experience debuted in Anaheim back in spring of '83 as part of the New Fantasyland project out there. And of course, it goes without saying that this Sword in the Stone ceremony takes its inspiration from the Disney animated feature that debuted in theaters Christmas Day of '63. Though I think we should pause here for a moment because people forget now. At that point in 1963, we were just a few weeks after President Kennedy had been assassinated on November 26th.
Yeah, the nation was still in shock and mourning. Yeah. Any sort of fun entertainment would probably be a huge hit.
No, that's it exactly. In fact, in that same window of time is when Stanley Kramer's cameo-filled big screen comedy "It's a Mad, Mad World" debuted in theaters.
I watched that over Christmas break.
Did
Jim.
you?
What a great! Oh my! It is. First of all, it's basically Cannonball Run, but set in the 1960s with every major Hollywood star, right? It's.
Yeah, it redefines the concept of Easter eggs. Because
everyone's playing themselves and doing their own jokes. Yeah,
there we go.
The amount of cultural literacy you had to have to understand the jokes in that movie was astounding. Like, it would be very difficult to pull off today.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. But a lot of people clung to that movie like a life preserve. And at the other end of the spectrum, Lem, February 7th, 1964. That's when the Beatles, the British invasion, they came to. They arrived at JFK and, there's John, Paul, Ringo, and George, and every teenager in the tri-state area screaming at them. Right. And for a lot of folks, they feel like that's the moment where we kind of came out of our national period of mourning. It just sort of like, okay. Yeah, but in the middle middle there is Sword in the Stone with its amazing wizards battle scene, the wizards duel. And Len, over the past 45 years, I've basically interviewed every major animator who worked for Disney in their second golden age, and to a man and a woman, when you talk to them about, well, what made you decide you wanted to do this? And it's like, I saw Sword in the Stone when I was a kid. And
you saw the wizard's duel sequence and you're like, I want to do that. Yeah.
That's it exactly. So, and by the way, the Imagineers were also very enthusiastic about that very same scene in the Sword of the Stone. In fact, if we go back to 1967, when the first design work is being done on Walt Disney World, there was a wizard's duel ride being prepped for Fantasyland. As the replacement for Mr. Toad's Wild Ride.
Okay, you had me until replacement for Mr. Toad's Wild Ride. It could be a standalone thing. That's fine, but okay.
Well, but this was the thing that early on, the Imagineers were exploring the idea of California has its rides for Fantasyland, and we have an entire, we have similar attractions for Florida. I mean, for example,
but not the same. Yeah.
Well, they were looking for the equivalent. I mean, for example, the Pretty ride, which out in California was Peter Pan. They were going to do a Sleeping Beauty ride. The Scary ride, which again, Snow White's Scary Adventure. They were going to do a Legend of Sleepy Hollow, which we've described on a recent Disney dish. And then finally, the silly fun ride, the Mr. Toad's Wild Ride, the Wizard's Duel. And what's especially worth noting is, remember, this is 1967, which you got to remember, the original Haunted Mansion opens in Anaheim in 1969. So they are well into not just design, but construction of the effects.
Yeah, they're testing effects. They're figuring out what works, what doesn't. Okay, cool.
All right. And at this point, everybody in the building has seen the hitchhiking ghost gag at the end of the Haunted Mansion. And it's just like, oh, that's such a great gag. We gotta find another way to bring that into the parks. And so this actually, for a time, was the tag gag for the Wizard's Duel ride. Again, in the ride, the notion is that several times over the course of the attraction, you travel through the crossfire line. Merlin's on one side, Mim's on the other side. They're hurling spells back and forth. And so it's now time for you to head on out to the offload. And you find yourself traveling next to the wall of the castle, where a couple of really brightly shined shields, the things that the knights use in battle, are hanging up on the wall.
Sure.
And so, but you could see your reflection in the shield as you pass by it, and you notice, I don't look like myself. I look like a cow or a horse or a pig.
Oh, genius. Yeah, you could totally do that, yeah.
But the thing is, just before you go through the crash doors back out into the sunlight, there was supposed to be a Merlin animatronic thing. Here, sorry, let me fix that. It's like waves his wand, and by the time you go outside, you look like a human again.
I love this concept because as you're going through the ride and you get hit by the spells, it's really straightforward to have the ride vehicle vibrate to let you know you've been hit. But you don't see it until the end. So you could wonder, like, well, what just happened to me there? And then at the end, you put the 2 and 2 together and say, oh, when the ride vehicle vibrated, that must have been when this spell changed me. Like, that totally makes sense. You could 100% do that.
Oh, yeah. And again, a lovely idea. Sadly, though, we didn't get this because, to be honest, Walt's brother, Roy O. Disney, at this point is watching the projected price of building, a destination resort out in the swamps of Florida go from $100 million to $200 million to eventually $400 million. And Roy's like, no. We don't need to reinvent the wheel here. Let's just stick with what we did in Anaheim and be done with it. Of course, what Roy didn't then understand is the Imagineers, being the Imagineers, went in and redesigned the rides that have been done in California. And, so we got new improved versions for Florida that cost just as much as the new stuff might have. But anyway, long story short, the Imagineers loved Sword in the Stone and were looking for ways for decades to bring that into the Disney parks. And the first opportunity came with the new Fantasyland project, again, as I mentioned, early 1980s. And here's the thing. One of the things that drove this redesign of Fantasyland out in California is, if we jump back to 55, they're running out of money. And so the notion of having, unique buildings for Snow White Scary Adventure, Peter Pan, Toad, it just falls off the table. And in their place, there's this conceit of, tournament tents. Tournament tents have been set up in the courtyard of Sleeping Beauty Castle. We can do that with plywood, and paint.
Yeah, plywood. Very large canvas, plastic impregnated canvas tents. Let's make it look good. Yeah.
There we go. And now the other thing that they learned the hard way after they opened the park is that the flat rides that were in Fantasyland, the Mad Tea Party, Dumbo, King Arthur Carousel, had been placed too close to one another, Len, and so there were these weird pinch points in this part of the park that made it difficult for people to get around. And so they were like, all right, if we ever revisit this side of the park, we're going to do something about that. And that happens in the mid-1980s. And after this break, we'll get specific about what was done. But first, this.
I had that dream again. My small business needs to hire, but I don't use LinkedIn, and I hire wrong. So then I'm doing IT, and when I go to plug the servers in, they become sentient, and they won't let us access our network unless we forward their chain emails and memes to more and more and more people, and then I wake up.
Don't let hiring nightmares ruin your dreams. LinkedIn Jobs' new AI assistant finds and invites best fit candidates to apply, so you can discover talent you may have missed. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/quality. Start hiring today with LinkedIn.
And we're back. Okay, Len. So, again, we were just talking about the new Fantasyland project. Phase 1 of this thing opens May of 83. But the real work, the actual demo, begins just after Thanksgiving, 1982. And in fact, Tony Baxter tells this story about, it's a couple of weeks afterwards, and he's behind the construction fence, that has been set up. In fact, this is the thing. They still need guests to get across the park, Len. So they have set up something similar to what we saw at DCA back when they were redoing that park, only it starts at the top of Big Thunder Pass and effectively crosses through to Matterhorn Way, but they've just laid, just a wall of construction fences, laid down some asphalt, and people are walking through that.
Wow!
But Tony's standing on the other side of the construction fence one day at dusk and looking at these gutted buildings, and it's like, okay, I did a good thing, right? And it's like
you've destroyed 30 years of park history to rebuild in your vision. You better hope your vision is right?
And so, but at that exact moment, evidently some of the electrical systems of the park or this side of the park are still running. That moment, the twinkle lights that outline the building come up. So now it's not just a gutted outside of the park; it's a lit up gutted up side of the park. And Tony's like, better. What have I done? But at the same time, what Tony wanted to do was address some things that he thought were relatively glaring. Like for example, there was the Alice dark ride that had been set up at the far edge of Fantasyland, but the Mad Tea Party was deeper in Fantasyland. There was no connective tissue. And Tony's argument was like, look, if we put the Alice Dark ride next to the Mad Tea Party and then put the Mad Hatter Hat Shop right there. We've created a mini land within Fantasyland, and it all hangs together. It all tells one story. And it's like, oh, okay, we can do that. But he was looking for other opportunities to do something similar. And so, and one of the other things he really wanted to do was sort of revisit Walt's idea of weenies, the notion of big things that loom over other parts of the park, the rocket ship, TWA, or the Mark Twain riverboat that compelled you to go deeper in the park. But Tony wanted to do, explore the idea of smaller weenies, the notion that if you reposition King Arthur's Carousel so that as you came up to Sleeping Beauty's castle and actually looked past the drawbridge into the land, if you positioned it just right, guests could see, oh, look at that. I want to go in there and ride that.
Well, plus it's got, you could see the movement too. It has a sense of a dynamic element
That's it.
to pull you into.
Absolutely.
Where was it before?
It was actually more off to the right. In fact, it was only after they got the park open and they realized that, well, you can partially see it. It's like, oh, we really should have thought about that when we were building this. We should have centered it. But the interesting thing, in order to center it, they had to move it a little further back, and they suddenly had some space in front of the King Arthur Carousel. And remember, here are the Imagineers who've been wanting to bring Sword in the Stone into the park, and it's like, ooh, let's create a guest experience. Let's set this up so that guests can actually experience this. So again, we got the thing that Jeremy was talking about, and more to the point, we created yet another mini land. We had the Sword in the Stone ceremony parked right in front of King Arthur's carousel, so you had things hanging together that were telling the same story. Anyway, again, this opens May of '83. And initially, Len, this is funded by the entertainment department at Disneyland, which meant there was a cast member dressed as Merlin who was accompanied by the Disneyland Brass Quintet as they presented the ceremony, sometimes as often as 6 times a day.
Wow.
Especially during the summer months. And what was great about having the Disneyland Brass Quintet as part of this is, Len, you'll especially appreciate this, that, when the inevitable, that Merlin pulls an adult out of the crowd and they can't make the sword come up out of the stone, this trombone player then did the sad trombone, like, wah, wah.
Wah, wah. Oh my God, that's great. Yeah. That is funny.
On the other hand, when the small boy or girl that Merlin eventually recruited succeeded in, raising the sword, the brass quintet plays a triumphant fanfare, and then the child gets presented with a bronze medallion, which they got to keep, by the way, which proclaimed them the temporary ruler of the realm. They also got an elaborate scroll. And by the way, that was the other thing that I heard this past week, that from a number of folks who had a brother or a sister have this happen to, and it said caused great moments of sibling rivalry the rest of the family vacation. It was kind of a sore point. Well, why did he get picked? I could have done that.
Exactly. You would not be able to put up with me if I was the one chosen ahead of my 3 siblings. Like, I would be lording that over everyone.
Well, again, you would never take the medallion off during your time in Florida. And by the way, right from the get-go, hugely popular with Disneyland guests. So much so that when Disneyland Paris is now being designed in the late 1980s, the Imagineers made sure to include space in that theme park in France, where this very same ceremony could be presented. Sure. And by the way, there's great video out there on YouTube of the French version of this, and Len, boy, did this one get bells and whistles. I mean, for example, there's a sort of a seating area immediately around the Sword in the Stone, and when Merlin comes out and begins to tell the story or the legend of the Sword in the Stone, there's this discrete smoke effect.
Oh,
and then when the child has actually completed the task, there's a chest right there that's part of the physical setup of this area in the park that Merlin can pop open, and there's a kid-sized crown and a cape that he can put on him, and then he parades this child around Fantasyland, and it's a wonderful moment.
Kind of ironic that the French have mastered the regal ceremony thing, but okay, all right.
Well,
come back in 20 years, we'll chop your head off. It's
there
fine.
We go. That's right. A child-friendly guillotine. Anyway, we get Sword in the Stone ceremony arrives in Walt Disney World in '94, and
that late. I am shocked it's that late. Okay, all right.
Well, again, but it winds up being placed in front of what originally was called Cinderella's Golden Carousel, now Prince Charming's Regal Carousel. And the very last park to get a Sword in the Stone ceremony was Hong Kong Disneyland. It opened with the park in 2005. That got pulled out of the park relatively recently, Len, October of 2023. This is where their Walt statue is called Dream Makers. It's a bronze of Walt and Mickey on a bench was placed. And anyway, speaking of the Sword in the Stone ceremony, not being removed entirely from the park, but as the 90s give way to the 2000s, the entertainment department at the Disney parks finds its, budget shrinking. This is why we see, beloved groups at the parks like Billy Hill and the Hillbillies disappearing. And so it's kind of, every time a wave comes in, there's a little less of the show there. I mean, first the brass quintet goes away and is replaced by pre-recorded music, so no more sad trombone. Then, the brass medallion and the Royal Proclamation, it only becomes a Royal Proclamation, and then an official certificate. And eventually Merlin himself is dropped from the show, and we get an hourly employee presiding over the Sword in the Stone. And by the mid-2000s, we're now in a space where it's something that happens by itself. In fact, that's, the note we got earlier, from listeners to the effect of, it's still going on in the park. It's like, randomly. Yeah. There's an employee somewhere standing by with the, for lack of a better term, the remote controlled garage door opener that powers, and when, they see a child that they like, especially, they turn it on and somebody has a wonderful moment. By the way, though, if you want to see the medallions and the certificates and the like, that used to be handed out to folks who took part in the Sword in the Stone ceremony, surprising them, a bunch of them available over on eBay now at many different price points.
Really? It's like buying an English peerage, I feel. Like, you shouldn't be able to do that. Something shouldn't be able to be acquired for money.
Well, there we go. There we go. One final weird little bend on this story, Len. A lot of folks wrote out and said, well, you did hear what happened in February of 2020. And it's like, well, what happened? And it's like, this is when a bodybuilder by the name of Sam went to Disneyland in Anaheim. And he actually did pull the sword out of the stone. I mean, all the way out.
So it's not like latched in. It's some sort of like friction fit.
Well,
wow.
He pulled it out of the mechanism that, it was a squared off piece of the blade that was tied into the mechanism that lifts it up and lowers it down back into the anvil. And
wow.
Sam did not know his own strength, I guess.
I was going to say, so he's holding the sword, and like, what's step 2 in his master plan here?
Well, to give Sam credit, he immediately apologized and handed it off to a Disneyland employee, and they did make the repair. But also in closing here, there are those of us who miss Merlin in the Disney parks. In fact, I used to enjoy quite a bit Sorcerers of the Magic Kingdom, largely because, again, you got to see a lot of Merlin when that show was up and running from 2012 to 2021. And in fact, Merlin made a return to the Disney parks as a live character in February of 2000, just a month after Sam pulled the sword out. In the Magic Happens parade, they actually had a Sword in the Stone unit in this parade where there was a young King Arthur at the top of the float who would periodically pull out the sword and stick it back in the anvil. But down toward the front of the parade float land, there was a dancing Merlin who you really have to see. There's footage out there of this relatively short-lived parade, because you got to remember, It launches in February of 2000. The park itself closes down for the pandemic in mid-March. And then is closed for more than a year. And when Magic Happens, the parade came back, it only came back in 2004. And even then, I want to say it was from mid-March through mid-August. And then it went away forever. But they had a Merlin at the front of the parade that, near as I can figure, either needed a bathroom break or it had 12 cappuccinos. Either way, he was moving.
I'll see if I can find a video and throw it in the show notes.
Yeah, but anyway, again, it was just thanks to all of the Disney Dish listeners who reached out about the Sword in the Stone ceremony, because again, it the way people talk about it, it was, those who got to experience it, it was a very big deal. It was a very big part of that particular trip for their family to Walt Disney World, and they miss it, which is why, people to this day, will just sort of slide by and, tug on the sword and, every
just
so
a quick
often,
pull. You know what?
Just a quick pull.
You miss 100% of the shots you don't take, right?
There we go.
I love it. I love when the park does things like this. I think it's a great way to become more involved in the stories and in the theming of the land. So hope to see stuff like this soon. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, folks, that's going to do it for the show today. You can help support our show by subscribing over at patreon.com/JimHaleMedia, where we're posting exclusive shows every week. Our latest show is a live walk through the Magic Kingdom with me, Jim, and the progressively seductive Jim Scholl, and there's a link in the show notes. On the next episode to be posted over on his YouTube channel, Jim Scholl tells us why modern Epcot doesn't live up to expectations, and check it out on Jim Scholl's Disney Journey channel on YouTube. Again, there's a link in the show notes. On next week's show, set your time machines to 1981 while Jim reviews some internal pre-opening Epcot construction newsletters. You can find more of Jim at jimhalemedia.com and more of me, Len, at touringplans.com. And speaking of Chris Cox, who was our host last week, check out The Case 4 with Chris Cox. It's a new podcast where Chris, Jim, and I debate one theme park topic at a time, and you get to vote on who's right. We're produced spectacularly by Eric Kersey and David Gray, who'll be judging the synchronized Snow Angel competition at the 2026 St. Joe Ice Fest, sponsored by Silver Beach Pizza, February 6th to the 8th, 2026 on State Street in beautiful downtown St. Joseph, Michigan. While Eric and David are doing that, please go onto iTunes and rate our show and tell us what you'd like to hear next. For Jim, this is Len. We will see you on the next show.